Good morning, bonjour, lakut. I recognize that it may border on trite for the individual serving as Chief Electoral Officer to suggest that during 2017 we turn our thoughts to democracy, but that is precisely what I'm going to propose. If the subject is to be expected, I hope that the object might surprise. I'm not going to talk about voter turnout or political parties or internet voting. Rather, I'm going to talk about the Constitution. The conference organizers asked for one big idea for 2017, and it seems to me that in this country, big ideas are often inevitably constitutional. Now, I recognize that use of the word Constitution may risk causing audience malaise and perhaps even fear. It has been stated, and this applies just as much in the North as it does in Ottawa, Calgary, or Quebec City, that our constitutional odyssey has resulted in fatigue. That is no reason to stop exercising. Our Constitution is at the heart of our democratic vitality. Constitutions facilitate relationships. They specify who is a member of a group, what the group does, and how a group takes decisions. I'm going to discuss two relationships. First, our relationship to the Constitution, and secondly, the Constitution's relationship to us. For the majority of us, we are most acutely aware of our relationship to the Constitution during an election. It is as electors that we exercise the right to vote, a fundamental constitutional right. The process of becoming elector, by reaching the age of 18, being granted citizenship, and/or establishing residency, is a seminal moment whereby each person establishes a direct relationship with the Constitution. Our individual relationship to the Constitution is therefore not merely symbolic, for it facilitates our democratic participation. In other words, it structures our right to choose who governs. When examining our relationship to the Constitution, two observations are fundamental. First, the relationships of Yukoners, Nunavummiut, and Northerners to the Constitution of Canada differs. Our territorial constitutions, governance arrangements, and constitutional fabrics differ in significant ways. Second, the relationship that residents of all three territories have with the Constitution of Canada is not the same as the relationship held by those who are residents of provinces, nor do we necessarily aspire for them to be the same. The first observation is infrequently articulated. To anyone who says that the only political difference between the three territories is the existence of political parties in the Yukon, one might encourage a more careful examination. One example of incongruence that I know well is the process for dissolving a legislative assembly. Before I, as Chief Electoral Officer, am authorized to issue writs of election, a series of actions taken sequentially must occur. In parliamentary democracy, the first step is dissolving the Legislative Assembly. In provinces, dissolution is granted by the Queen's representative, the Lieutenant Governor, and in Yukon and Nunavut, dissolution is granted by the Commissioner. The Northwest Territories is the only subnational jurisdiction in Canada where dissolution is not granted by a resident executive, but rather by a representative of the federal crown, the Governor and Council, that is, the Prime Minister. I cannot issue writs of election, and the Commissioner may not order me to do so, absent a federal order in Council. My colleagues in Yukon and Nunavut do not share this experience. But there are plenty of other constitutional differences between the three territories. This includes the issuance or not of letters of instruction to the Commissioner, as well as the process for changing our governing statutes. These have arisen from very different political histories. It's striking to note that the population in Yukon was greater in 1898 than it is today. Evolving from that process has seen a much earlier development of responsible government, and more recently, the devolution of responsibility over land and resource management to the Yukon in 2003, which made significant changes to the Yukon Act and the political governance of the Yukon. In Northwest Territories, the story is very different. It wasn't until 1951, that we elected some representatives to serve on our territorial council. It wasn't until 1975 that we had a fully elected territorial council, and not until 1985 that the commissioner was fully withdrawn from the day-to-day operations and administration of government. The political story in Nunavut is probably better known than those of Yukon or Northwest Territories, where with the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement and the creation of the government of Nunavut and officially the territory of Nunavut in 1999, the political history of Nunavut certainly draws upon that in the Northwest Territories, but is certainly now, if not then, distinct and separate from. The territories, though perhaps of the same genus, are not and have never been the same species. The second of the two observations I made may be more fundamental. The constitutional fabric compared between each territory also differs, but it differs much more significantly than what one finds in any province. In Nunavut, public government functions alongside Inuit organizations, both of which have their origins in the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement. In Yukon, umbrella agreements and co-management bodies fuse some decisions in territorial governance. In the Northwest Territories, intergovernmental relationships are evolving as land claim and self-government agreements are signed. Popular understanding of constitutionalism in the North includes recognition of the inherent right to self-government. This difference is not trivial. These mechanical arrangements, though seemingly arcane, facilitate our individual relationships to the Constitution. They instruct us how to resolve differences and how to take decisions. They help bind us to each other as well as to the country. So the foregoing covers how we relate constitutionally to Canada. How does Canada relate to us? The Constitution of Canada is composed of three elements: the Constitution Acts, common law, and constitutional conventions. Over time, constitutional conventions have strengthened territorial stature. For example, premiers are called premiers, and they attend First Ministers' conferences as First Ministers. Although there is no territorial crown, letters of instruction to commissioners make clear that they are to behave as lieutenant governors in everything but name. Common law further underscores territorial vitality. Courts have confirmed everything from parliamentary privilege for legislators to the right to effective representation for electors. However, Canada's relationship to us in the written Constitution, I would argue, falls short. The Constitution Acts recognize the right to elect members of territorial legislative assemblies. That's about it. Perhaps it is time for Canada's written constitution to demonstrate a stronger relationship to us in the North. One might argue that the broad purpose of centennial celebrations is both to bolster civic pride as well as to reinforce political unity. How better, then, to symbolically build upon recent attention to the Arctic and the development of responsible government in all three territories than to enhance constitutional recognition of the peoples who live here. Now, an inevitable refrain is of course expected: provincehood. I would not dare. Nearly 30 years ago, Gordon Robertson, a former commissioner of the Northwest Territories, who later went on to serve as clerk of the Privy Council, including in 1967, argued why provincehood is a mistaken goal. In fact, he was less critical of the goal itself and more simply pessimistic about the prospects for provincehood, given the constitutional amending formula, fiscal federalism, and the potential dilution of powers for other members of the Federation. So be it. But there is no reason why strengthened recognition of northern jurisdictions in the Constitution of Canada need mirror or even resemble what currently constitutes provincialism. We may no longer be territories in anything but name, and we certainly do not resemble the colonial relics that grew from Rupert's Land. But we may not also aspire to be provinces. In fact, the territories have evolved to points where the complex fusion of Aboriginal and public government would likely strain under the classical provincial model. I propose that in 2017, we initiate a northern as well as a national conversation about a democratically appropriate place for the North in the Constitution of Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, David Brock. Can you just elaborate on your last point, your final conclusion? I just want to know a little bit more.
If either a new elector, someone who's just come of age or has just become a Canadian citizen, wants to better understand their relationship to the Constitution's relationship to them, one of the things they might first do is look at the Constitution Acts, particularly the Act from 1867. We all remember the British North America Act from high school history, or the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. There's very little recognition in our written Constitution that the territories even exist, that they're even on the map. I think the trajectory of responsible government, and particularly the decisions recently and in Yukon 10 years ago related to devolution, signify that the territories have come of age. And I think part of the territories coming of age politically and democratically, and Canada coming of age politically and democratically, means that 2017 may be time for our Constitution to recognize these three jurisdictions in the North.
But without becoming a province.
I leave that to the conversation between Northerners and the rest of the country.
The conversations will be interesting this afternoon. Thank you very much,
Great.
David Brock.
Thank you.